Hey guys, this is Andrew from Revival Sound Studios. Been a Console 1 owner for a long time here. Been seeing lots of posts on our Facebook group lately about the consoles, some general questions, and kind of just looking around generally at the YouTube. There hasn't been much activity around Console 1. Of course, Softtube's been pretty good about posting videos, but some just general tutorials and stuff. There was definitely a lot when Console 1 came out, but lately there hasn't been many. So I figured I would do a video just in general on the Console 1 British Class A and just do a general overview, give some really, things that I've learned. I've owned the Console 1 now for about 2 years. I love it to death. I actually just recently got the Console 1 Fader as well, which is really kind of completed. Well, it's not really a holy trinity, but it's a trinity in my mind of, workflow for me. And just want to share some of the things I've learned over the years. Disclaimer, I have no Grammys. I have not worked with any label artists. So, take the information with a grain of salt, but I just wanted to provide some foundational stuff and the things that I found that have been successful with the device. So, little background about me. I played music all as a kid, teenager, played in a lot of rock bands and stuff. I started doing recording about 10 years ago, but didn't really take it too serious, but kind of moved on towards learning more and more about the craft. And then in the last few years decided, I've just always loved the studio, even when I was playing in bands and such, that I just want to really hone this craft as a great hobby, and also give back to the local scene community that I was a part of for a long time. So I started recording bands and had some moderate success with that. But as I kind of grew further and further, I wanted to kind of get two passions together, and that's where I started kind of uncovering game sound design. So lately I've been kind of shifting away, especially with the coronavirus. I've been shifting more towards doing orchestral stuff for video games, making sound effects, and I've been really loving that. And of course, Console 1 is just a beast. It handles so many different genres so well for that. So want to bring you guys towards here a project I'm working on that we will go over with the British Class A for that. So we're going to go ahead and get started here with this mix I've been doing. It's very intense kind of battle mix. This is going to be for when the character in a game I'm working on is actually fighting a bunch of wolves with his bow and arrow. So let's go ahead and dive into the mix here, and then we'll break apart each element. I've already mixed this song using entirely pretty much the British Class A, except for some reverb tracks. I did use the 4000. But we'll take a look at this mix. We'll take a look at each of the elements, kind of what I did, just so you can get an overview of what the British Class A can do and some good ideas on how to use this thing, because it can definitely be misused. Let's go ahead and start with the track. So that's the track there. It's a tiny bit repetitive, of course. You don't want to go too nuts on a fight scene because the music is to serve the game. You want the player focused on fighting the wolves, but this is just a great little action background that sets the tone for everything on that regard. So with this mix, like I said, I entirely use the British Class A, incredible console for this mix. I love what it does to orchestral stuff because it just really sweetens certain elements of the mix up and really provides a great soundscape for this mix. One thing that I like to do when I mix is definitely always try and find some key elements. That's something that I've been, especially lately, really focused on is before just diving into a mix, because sometimes that's a downside of the console one. Is, well, I wouldn't really call it a downside, but what happens sometimes is it's so easy to just dive in and start twisting knobs that sometimes you lose out on the deeper planning of a mix. So that's something I've been trying to rest back a little bit. So some of the big things I noticed in this mix was the metal hits are really what I wanted. They really drive the mix, and they really create this like clashing, intense thing. The metal anvil hits of this are just excellent. So those are a thing in the mix I wanted to focus on. And then just the drums. You'll notice the drums were incredibly loud. If this was more for just like maybe a movie soundtrack or something like that, I might have the drums a bit quieter, but I want the player to feel that rhythm. Obviously in ancient times, drummers were an important part of an army, and wanted to do the same exact kind of feeling, so that player always has that beat just like barreling down them as they try and fight these wolves off with their bow and arrow. So let's go ahead and break down the mix here, and let's just kind of see how everything went. So we'll start off with track 1 here, which is our drum bus. Pretty much just hit this with a compressor. Oh no, the window. Sorry guys, sometimes this window resizes itself when I restart my computer, so let's get this resized here. So let's go ahead and solo this track. Let's just take a look at what the compressor's doing here. I didn't touch any EQ on this. I felt the drums were pretty clean for this, so let's just hear a little compression on it. And the drums don't come in for just another second, so hang tight. Here they come. Notice the compressor is like barely on, but there is a difference. This compressor is really good. It just like slightly working on something. Let's kind of hear A and B. Oops, the wrong stem here. Let's hear A, B with that off. Okay, I hope you're listening on good speakers, because that's insane. That compressor is barely doing a dB of gain reduction, and the tightness that track gained is ridiculous. So incredible compressor. The British Class A is really the king of not needing much. I know you guys hear tons of YouTube videos, and I'm guilty of this as well, of people like, well, you only do 1 to 3 dB and that's it. And of course that's never always the truth. If there was a hard iron truth in mixing, then we would all be famous. So, but that technique can be very useful. So don't hear anything anybody says on YouTube. It's one of the mistakes I made, and hear something as like that's the only way this can play out is you only do 1 to 3 gain, or the guys that go, well, you only cut in mixing. No, like don't take rules as hard grains of salt. Just take them as tips and ideas for that. So let's keep moving on here so we don't end up with a 3-hour video here. Let's go to track 2 here. And by the way, guys, I'm using really phenomenal plugin here. Oh, this is actually mixed down, doesn't have it, is the Spitfire Originals. This is their cinematic percussion. It's only 29 bucks. It's stupidly good. Like this track just really slams for that. I was really lacking in my percussion libraries for that, and Spitfire killed it. So I highly recommend that library. Let's go to next track down, which is our low percussion. So the way it's organized is they have like some lower percussion hits. So let's listen to this track in solo. Taking the compressor out. So we have a little 60 frequency hertz boost here, and just a nice little 2 dB of gain. Really brings out that low frequency. I want this drum to literally feel like an earthquake. And what I love about the British Class A is when you do your cuts, you'll notice right here is that there's a little boost at the end of the cut. And this worked out really nice at a 6K hertz because I've noticed it when I cut filtered down here, it brought out a little extra attack of the drum for that. So that was excellent. Compressor, we're hitting this one pretty decently. Let's see the dB. And notice by decently, we're at a 4-to-1 ratio, and we're just getting about 3 dBs of gain. Notice I didn't hit this with a drive. I'm going to talk about drive a bit later. I have some general really easy theories on how to use the drive section, but we'll talk about that a bit later. But this didn't need it. It's already slamming. I don't need to distort it just because I can. Just because you have the knob doesn't mean you need to use the knob. So just got this guy dialed in real quick for the basis of the sound. Let's go to the next track. Oops, let's unsolo that. So here we have our cymbal. Let's take a look at this. Let me get to that section. The cymbals don't come until later. Let's solo and let's hear it. Without. Back in. Once again, Neve just knocks it out of the park. Highly recommend if you're newer to the Neve consoles, one of the easiest ways to get a good sound, and of course, please, obviously take this with a grain of salt, but a great way to start experimenting, this is how I kind of learned Neve, is to really start with these upper frequencies. Take like a snare drum, take like something that has some, needs a crack or some air, and right around the 12 or do the 10K hertz, throw a shelf and just watch something like totally come to life. When I first started mixing, I was using the Slate Digital plugins in their Neve, and that was like one of the first ahas in mixing where I saw like how the Neve could totally like rebuild the sound out, and I was just blown away. And ever since then, I've just loved using Neve on everything for that, and this cymbal's no different. Notice how I didn't need to do any mids or anything like that. I've got a really generous low cut here, and then boom, a little shelf, and this thing just comes alive for that. Compressor was just pretty light on this, just to kind of control it a little bit. Make sure you don't want your cymbals popping out of nowhere. I didn't want them to take away from the metal hits or my earthquake. I wanted them just to give some nice brightness. Now, this is the first time here on the track where I've actually used the drive section. So, the drive section has been one of my favorite parts of Console 1 for the longest time since I've owned that thing. And honestly, guys, the best way, and feel free to comment or correct me if I'm like totally out of line, but the drive section, the best way to put it is don't put too much thought into it. This is literally the knob where it should be all your ears. The second you're trying to take your drive knob and you're like, well, if I do the 5.9 and then I take the character to 0.5, that, no. The drive section is always by feel. Always by feel. Close your eyes, put your hand on the drive knob, and make it work, right? The only thought process I put in the drive knob is maybe certain tracks I don't use it on, like, for example, when I talked about the low percussion. But if you're going to use the drive on a track, just close your eyes and turn it till you like it, okay? If you overthink it, you will end up misusing the drive, and you will make your stuff sound worse. That is my 2 cents on the drive. Let's keep moving. So next up, on the percussion, we have a kind of higher percussion hit. So the Spitfire breaks it up. They have low hits, they have their cymbal hits, then they have high percussion hits. So let's take a look at these and what we're doing on these. So just a really solid hit, and I knew this was also one of the most important hits in the song. This hit just comes in at the beginning of each bar, and I wanted to make it just, really heavy, hit the compressor pretty well, added some good drive till I liked it. narrowed down the frequencies with some cuts, boosted up at that 220. I kind of thought of this more almost like my snare drum in the mix. And then got a little attack on the 3.2 hertz for that. So just some nice little gains, some drive and some compressor, and you guys hear that. And just want to take a little note there, that's so important when you're using Console 1, is to hit the equalizer and compressor and turn them both off at the same time, and then bring them both back in. Really important part of your mix. We have the surface to support us. It's so easy to turn things off. You can't use a mouse and turn off a compressor and equalizer at the same time. Well, I guess you could with an effects button, but it's much cooler to do it with your hands and way more intuitive for it. So let's keep moving. There's another high percussion element in here. Let's hear that. So with this element here, really nailed the compressor in. I wanted to get that nice little, this is adding some good moving rhythm. Once again, we're in a battle scene. We can't just have, single hits. We need a lot of movement as well to keep the player going for that. So, once again, low cut. I want the earthquake drums to handle that frequency. Little mid gain boost in there, and then a nice little compression with some more drive to taste on that regard. Now, let's get to a point here where I want to talk about how dang good the Neve is in the British Class A. One of the most important things, and this is not for everybody, everyone's got different mixing styles, so, there's no right or wrong here, but one thing I really like is that the Neve naturally locks you into choices, right? So if you look here on the frequency slider, this isn't an SSL where I could say, well, the 1.9K, that causes me to go crazy and overthink things. Well, at 2.135K, that's where I need to cut. I just love where it's just the Neve bands are they're already set. You can't go in or out or in between them. You need to think about your bands strategically, and they're just like the perfect spectrum of bands, And of course, one of the big things back in the day, most the British Class A's only had 3 frequency bands. They had the low, the mid, and the high. And now with digital, we get kind of the best of both worlds, where we have 2 mid bands, which really just makes this console excellent, because sometimes you will need the 2 mid frequencies for that. But those fixed frequency ranges really let me focus so much more than worrying about frequencies. I don't, with the SSL, I always found myself like sweeping frequencies till I was going crazy. And I found personally myself that was like taking away from my mixes, because my mix ended up just being me like sweeping frequencies for 2 hours. And then I would just go crazy trying to sweep and find things, whereas the Neve, I'm just like, I can, play around with this sound. That's definitely a higher mid sound that I want to accentuate, and there's 3, good frequency bands there, and I can play around with those 3, find which sounds the best really quick, and then just go for it. It doesn't let me overthink it, which is great. Let's keep moving on. So let's get to the metal hits. Yay, metal. So AB is pretty awesome there. Now, obviously, guys, the sound the level's increasing, so it's going to already sound better just being louder. But definitely, you can hear some more clarity, some more bite. Once again, guys, you got a high frequency thing. Just go right for the shelf and make that sound awesome. Like, that's just the beauty. I think I mixed this metal hit in literally 35 seconds, maybe tops. Just played around with some of the high frequency shells, found the good thing. Took a lot of time dialing in the compressor, threw on the drive, and boom, it was done for that. So next thing I want to show is there's a metal send. Our friend the SSL. Yes, I like When I do reverb sends, I do like the I want to cut my reverbs really heavily, just so they're getting that good mid-range kind of depth I want. And the SSL is a great little partner to do that. Now, if you go back 30 years ago, you're like an 80s engineer. You're like, man, I really wish I could have an SSL console just to filter. Well, that's not going to happen. That's an extra $100,000 you're going to invest. How are you going to fit two consoles in a room? You're just going to go for it. And I'm not saying the Neve could definitely cut these things pretty well for that, but I do like the SSL on reverb sends. It also lets me notch out, so I took out a little bit of 2.5K here, just as that was like a really alarming frequency. So I know I talked a lot about sweeping, how they go crazy. Once again, guys, don't take everything. With a reverb track that can get really bitey or too muddy, then yeah, some cutting is really great, right? But notice this is pretty much the only instance of this track of the SSL where I used it very strategically for that. Just the beauty of console 1, we can have multiple consoles for that. So let's keep going here. So now that's the entire drum bus. I'm gonna go ahead and solo that, and let's just hear that back in action. So pretty awesome sounding drums there. Now when I was mixing this, I know I just broke down everything in solo. When I was mixing this, I was definitely going back and forth, obviously hearing this in conjunction with all the music, and making sure that all the drums were working well together, balanced and everything. So, but just for the breakdown's sake, I did just solo one at a time. So keep that in mind. Let's move on to our string bass. So this kind of starts off the track. Love the Neve on string stuff. Once again, very simple stuff. Very straightforward. Let's get going. So subtle changes here. Just a little boost on 110 and a little extra on the 4.8K, just to get a little extra attack out of the thing. Very subtle boosts, just some drive to taste, and made it jump out. These are really good samples. These are coming from the Nucleus Light Edition. They're excellent samples already, so they don't need Chris Lord-Alge 12 boost. They just need little bits for that. Your source material might be different, so take that with a grain of salt. So we have that going. One great thing when you want to add low end, and this works, I've done this on rock tracks or anything, is to take a piano and have it play the bass notes and just literally do a big sustain. Notice just did a really slow release there, let it sustain out. The idea of this is to really just provide that low end punch, because the bass in this track is really focused on the string bass is really focused on those attack, the bump, bump, and that way the low piano is kind of helping fill out the low end. So I definitely added that in. Next up, we have my favorite part, of course. You want to write action, always go for the ostinato strings. Let's hear these guys. So boosting some attack on the 4.8K, good compression, some nice drive and character, cutting out the lows at 70. Straightforward, and they sound good. You will not get ostinato strings sounding this good, though, if you just do everything at velocity at 127. So there's a lot more in the MIDI programming that make these things sound good, and the Neve was just kind of the final touch, and that's where you really need to see this console. If you're working with really bad source material, not good samples, the Neve is going to be tough, guys. Like, you need to get your stuff recorded right at the source. I made that mistake for a long time, is just throwing a bunch of crap on there and then expecting the Neve to be this magical genie that would clean it up. That's not the case. You need to really spend time in your compositions and your tracks, getting them clean, and then let the Neve sweeten them to the next level. Let's keep moving here. We got our choir going. Once again, guys, the shelf is literally king. Like, when a source needs a shelf, a high shelf, like, the Neve destroys every other console, in my opinion. It just wrecks. It is so good. It is so, like, fat and perfect. So, just love it. Good little compression on these. I didn't feel like the vocals really needed much drive, so I abstained from that this time. Let's keep going down the list. Let's go to our horns. So the horns got a nice little boost at that 1.6. I definitely, when I was mixing this, I was playing around with a 3.2. A lot of times you'll find yourself 1.6 or 3.2 and a question mark. And that's great. You know, you're down to 2 options. You're not down to 400 different options with some of the other consoles. So just played around with that. Did a lot of A and B testing. Obviously did this within the context of the entire mix. And found that 1.6 was a great sweet spot to make these horns really cut. They come in at the very end of the loop, so I wanted them to just like kind of lift the whole track to this whole nother level before it ends for that. Let's get to the long strings. So I added a pair of long strings just to complement the horns. Didn't really do any EQ with these. I felt these were pretty good. A little bit of compression, a little bit of drive. I was very tempted to EQ these strings, but they're pretty lower volume in the mix. You know, Fader 1 did its magic. I'm really kicking myself for not buying Fader 1 a lot earlier, guys. Like, it's just mind-blowing how a few dB reduction for a track can just make it fit perfectly for that. So those are the long strings that complement the horns really well. And then down here we had, looks like another send. Let's see what this send is. Ah, yes, this is the percussion send I had forgotten about for that. This one I did use the Neve console to do the cuts. This is actually a send for that one-off hit I was talking about earlier, the high percussion, just like, you know, the one guy with the one drum that's just like doing a windmill slam on it for that drum. I wanted to add some really good reverb on there to just make that drum, you know, hit so well. It really depth. I wanted that hit to just like smash out, because it only comes at every bar. So that's kind of my general overview with the Neve. I love it to death for mixing. I hope this kind of helped a little bit. If you have any questions, let me know about the Neve. If you got any feedback, you know, I'm always looking for improvement myself for that. I mixed the song, and then lately I've been using the Weiss console to master everything, so then I ended up mastering this song with the Weiss. I love that combination. Neve sweetens it, and then with the Weiss I can do little, you know, sweeps and cuts, because that's excellent for like mastering and stuff to, you know, if there's somewhere in the track that where all the elements are kind of making something muddy, the Weiss can help finish it out if I went too far in the Neve or something. And it's an incredible combo. So loving doing the game design and loving this console and setup. So yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions.